We have finally arrived at Abba. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Cory.
And this week we have a special guest with us, Daniel Brilliant. Can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi guys, I'm Daniel. I previously hosted a podcast about film called The Gayvourites, and I've been on various movie podcasts, but I also have a strong passion for music. I grew up as a musician. I was a cello player from third grade through 12th grade. I used to participate in orchestra growing up, and I also was a part of this thing at my high school called Showcase, which was basically our talent show. And what I did for that was I played cello in the band, but I also would arrange songs for the string and horn sections. So I definitely have a musical background, and I took a music theory course in high school as well, and I've just always been super into it. And this album we're going to talk about today, and this band we're going to talk about today is like part of my foundation. So this will be fun.
There you go. Putting you on the spot. What was your arrangement for your senior showcase?
Well, I didn't just do like one. I did it for like multiple songs, but the big one was I took Led Zeppelin's Trampled Underfoot
Nice.
and I gave it a string and horn arrangement.
That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool.
Yes, very cool indeed. And Daniel is actually unique amongst our guests because he is our first listener turned guest, actually. All our previous guests have been acquaintances of Cory's and mine. This is our first listener turned guest, so that's really exciting, a bit of uncharted territory. We got to do something new almost 100 episodes in here at Turntables and Tea.
And it proves people are listening.
Yes, they exist.
But thank you. It's awesome to have you here today.
I came upon your guys' podcast when I just saw Janet Jackson in Baltimore. So I was looking for podcasts about Janet albums, and you had two of them. So there I was. And and then I just kept listening, and here I am now. And also, I'm a Baltimore local like you both. So as soon as I found out y'all were local, I was like, okay, I want to support this local podcast. So
We appreciate you.
Yes,
Thank
we do.
you.
We appreciate you taking the time to come with us and discuss a band that we actually we alluded to quite a bit in our first episode, because our first episode was an ABBA covers album, but now we're actually going to discuss the real artifact. I'm very excited to be it too, because ABBA's part of my DNA as well. My dad grew up with ABBA in the 70s and was a big fan and had this album. And I ended up getting it myself in like 2017. My cousin's wife sent me a box of albums because she found out I was into vinyl, and this was one of them in there. I was like, oh, cool, Abba-Arrival. And I played it and learned all these great new ABBA songs, not just the ones on the gold CD, which I've had forever, of course, because everybody has it pretty much. 30 million copies sold worldwide. So
Yeah, and speaking of 100 podcasts, going through my listens for this, I'm like, have we done an ABBA album? Like, have we done and then I kept going over and over in my head. I was like, oh shit, no, we did the Cher cover album, Dancing Queen, right? Was that the name of that album?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it was all ringing true to me here, like Fernando and all that. Other than my love for Mamma Mia. It's hard to pull it out critically on this album form. I'm excited to get into that too.
Daniel, what was your introduction to ABBA?
I mean, I've known ABBA as long as I can remember. Dancing Queen is the first pop song I ever consciously remember hearing. So, like, this is foundational to my life. Like, my parents had ABBA Gold growing up and would play it constantly when we were driving around. So, like, Dancing Queen, Mamma Mia, SOS, those are foundational songs to me. Like, some of the earliest pop songs I remember hearing. And I also did theater growing up, and of course got acquainted with Mamma Mia through that, and eventually saw both Mamma Mia and Mamma Mia Here We Go Again, the film and the sequel, in theaters. And those films, especially actually Mamma Mia 2, got me interested in their deeper catalog outside of Gold, because, as we'll discuss, a lot of the songs on Arrival were in Mamma Mia 2. Almost the entire album, actually.
You are correct. Over half of the songs on this album made their way into Mamma Mia 2. And I do find it very interesting. We talk about ABBA Gold, and that wasn't released until 1992. And it's easily the band's biggest selling album. But I do feel like that the omnipresence of that album has kind of, in some eyes, maybe made people regard ABBA as a singles band, and wrongly so, but it's just the success of that album, because even ABBA's entry in the 33 and the Third Book series is on ABBA Gold, which is crazy that it's on the greatest hits album, but it's just such a successful hits album. But that's not entirely fair, because they do have a strong, deeper catalog. And this was really my first entry into it, was hearing this album even before, a bit before Mamma Mia 2 came out. So there's really a lot to discuss here beyond the hits. And
what were their American numbers like for the release of this album?
So this album peaked at number 20 in America.
Heard.
But it's gone on to go gold. So
that's where I think it comes in, or I would hypothesize, without the time traveling machine, why people now think of them, wrongfully so or rightfully so, as a singles band, because it wasn't until later, in my opinion, Mamma Mia age, where I feel like the American populace period got into ABBA. I'm not saying it wasn't popular, but it didn't stick. It was too, I would think it was too theatrical for radio play. That's why Dancing Queen, any American, I would say, boom, they automatically know that. But you venture even ankle deep into the deep waters of their discography, and I feel like most people probably wouldn't know that it was them or who they were.
I mentioned earlier, my dad was a big fan of this group back in the 70s. And he always told me, like, ABBA was so much bigger in Europe than they were in the States. But this album did have some longevity in the States. It was in the top 40 year end for 1977 still, but it was just nothing compared to the other numbers. I mean, this was the UK's biggest selling album of 1977, because ABBA was just that big. And even their tour for this album signified just how huge they were. It was the Beatlemania of the 70s in Europe and Australia for ABBA.
What's interesting is I'm just discovering they've only had 4 top 10 hits in America, which is crazy when you consider, like, everybody knows everything on ABBA Gold now because of Mamma Mia.
Yeah.
The only 4 top 10 hits they had in America were Dancing Queen, Waterloo, Take a Chance on Me, and The Winner Takes It All.
All absolute classics, but in hindsight, it is pretty crazy. And I'm definitely a chart history nerd, if you can't tell, if you've been listening to this show for a while. I'm super into it. And yet, in hindsight, it's so crazy. And we'll talk a bit about it on this album, because I did look into what these songs charted behind at times, and it's really crazy. And at times, like, history has shown that these songs have stood the test of time. Well, 70s has a lot of great music. It's a great music decade, but there are some stinkers in there, as with every era, but some of them are embarrassing. And speaking of hits, I'm glad you mentioned hits, Daniel, because in 1976, when this album was released, ABBA this is their 4th studio album, but in between their prior album and this, ABBA's record company released a greatest hits album, which was super premature and just really strange in hindsight. Only really 5 major hits on it, actually. But it was a really successful release, because it did have those hits in one place, even though as time has gone on, of course, they were superseded by others. But it did put some gas in the tank for the Arrival launch. And this album was released because you could do this back then in the pre-internet days. You could release the album at different dates in different countries. And that is exactly what happened with Arrival, because it was released in Sweden, ABBA's home country, in October of 1976, but in the US, it was released in January of 1977. It's so different how we do it now, almost 50 years later, but it's very interesting to see Just they really did have to consider the different markets for their music when rolling out their albums and singles.
I'm so glad you said it too, because I believe the longevity of this album on the Billboard, I would have to, I shouldn't say believe, I would have to hypothesize it's from, I'm going to use the word genius for the first time this podcast, not the last, but the genius scheduling of the singles. Don't put Dancing Queen out first because it's guaranteed bangerlicious. I believe Fernando was first, and I don't have it in front of me, but put something else ahead of it so everybody who wants Dancing Queen is buying this album, US side. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that is exactly pretty much what happened.
And we'll also discuss this. Fernando was not originally on the album, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. We had this discussion a bit last week on our White Album episode. This is another one of those bands where sometimes the singles were not on the albums, and it's very confusing historically, and there's bad calls made on it. We'll just say that now. No beating around the bush here, but that is what has happened, and we'll see it with this era. But yeah, Fernando didn't come officially a part of the album, didn't become part of it really till quite a bit later.
Yeah, that was definitely surprising to find out.
But yeah, this is a very successful album for the band. It really did catapult them into the upper echelon of superstardom, and it really does get to ABBA's iconic status. It just went into another level. Daniel, I know you told me beforehand that you went through ABBA's entire discography in preparation to discuss Arrival here today. So I'm very curious, what growth points do you feel that you saw in the progression up to Arrival?
Well, what's interesting is they kind of had a false start of a first album with Ring Ring, because if you know anything about ABBA's history, their song Ring Ring was supposed to be their first Eurovision entry, but it did not win the Swedish heats for Eurovision. So that album, and also they weren't even called ABBA yet. They were called Björnen, Benny, Agnete, and Annefrid. Very hard to pronounce names, so I'll just say it right now. ABBA consists of Björn Ulvaeus, Benny Andersson, Annefrid or Frida Lingstad, and Agnete Folkskud. That's the four members of ABBA. And so it was very unsuccessful around the world because nobody could pronounce that band name. So, like, Ring Ring was a hit in Europe and South Africa, but like in Australia, but did not cross over to America. So then their second album, Waterloo, was really their international breakthrough because the song Waterloo won Eurovision. And just they really were eye-catching on Eurovision because they wore these insane costumes and like decided to sing in English, which was a very smart decision on their part because not every country would sing in English. A lot of them would sing in their native languages. So Waterloo, the song, you could hear a lot of the roots of what would become like their later catalog on the song Waterloo. The rest of that album isn't quite as good as that song, I would say. There's like a couple other songs up to that level, but Waterloo isn't consistent. But the album before this, ABBA, self-titled, really kind of started crystallizing it because that's where you have Mamma Mia and SOS, which are like their two early defining hits, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And you kind of hear exactly what you would get here, although there's more of a rock element to the previous album. This is pretty much pure pop compared to the previous album, which had several rock songs on it. So this is really where the ABBA pop sound crystallized in terms of their trajectory.
Yeah, I feel like they really stepped back into or fell full force back into their Eurovision mindset in this album as far as the theatrical production and the composition throughout. It's really Eurovision to me, or excuse me, Eurovision stylings, that over the top fully orchestrated thought process. Maybe not so much of the Eurovision now, but back when they were winning with like Waterloo and stuff, these grandiose compositions and grandiose stage shows. But yeah, I feel like they really jumped back into that here.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And it is a new era. There were a lot of there were some new and old sounds that really found their way into this album. We'll be discussing them all track by track, of course, but it is all pop. It is all their style, but there's a lot of different elements here, and I feel like this album really has all of that. And in 2016, Pitchfork posted a review of this album, which I'll be talking about in there because there's some really great quotes. But the byline of this review, written by Simon Goddard, is, quote, "At their best, as on Arrival, ABBA were as mysterious as Bowie, as rococo as Phil Spector, as unbearably sad as the Smiths," unquote. So that's a lot.
I'm with him on the first two. I don't get, maybe it's just me, I don't get as much of the sadness as I read in like reviews and breakdowns of these songs. And maybe that's just me. I'm not saying they don't convey feeling.
I would say that more comes on their later albums. Their last two before their reemergence with Voyage a few years ago are definitely their albums with their saddest songs on it. Especially their last release up until Voyage, The Visitors, which is very much like a divorce album. So
that'll do it. That'll do it.
Yeah. When all is said and done, indeed, for that, to reference that album.
I heard that.
But yeah, I think some of when it comes to the Pitchfork, they have their reputation as music snobs, so they have to justify why they're reviewing a pure pop album. You know, ABBA's had such longevity at this point that you can't deny it, whether it's pop music or not. And it goes into a lot of big musical debates. But this is definitely a key part of poptimism, which I am a proud poptimist. I all day, every day will identify as that. And ABBA is part of the fabric of pop music as we know it today. And there are just these beautiful, incredible songs. And I am super excited to now do what we do best here and discuss these songs track by track. So with that being said, let's get started.
All right, let's get at it.
Arrival begins with When I Kiss the Teacher. It is a song about a schoolgirl crush. One of the later songs recorded for the album, actually. It was originally entitled Rio de Janeiro. Kind of a, considering where we went here, kind of strange, but the Phil Spector comparison is most evident on this song. This is very Wall of Sound Spector influence, but brought to 1976, and they did Spector better than Spector was doing in the 70s, quite frankly. But yeah, I think it's a really great, deep track. It's a shame it's a deep track to an extent, but I think it takes on a very universal feeling of like you have a crush on the teacher. That's something many students experience. I know I can relate. It's very sweet sounding. It's very just sunny sounding. It's a very happy song. And I think it's a great album opener. This is definitely one of my favorite album opening tracks of the entire 70s decade. I'll say that now. It really is on that level for me. I loved this song the minute I heard it. I knew I was in for a fun ride with Arrival when I hit the needle and this started playing. I really did know that.
So, Charlie, I'm glad you brought up Phil Spector because I was just going to bring this up to preface how we were going to discuss these songs. So, ABBA's two main songwriters are Benny Andersson and Bjorn Ulvaeus. I would say that they definitely have Spector, but also elements of Brian Wilson's classic Beach Boys era, where he would record stuff like Pet Sounds and the Smile Sessions, because there's that sunshine element to what they do, and even a bit of that, like, some of their songs even have a surf kind of rhythm, and there's a couple on here that really do. But also, I would say Benny and Bjorn as a combo feel a lot like Elton John and Bernie Taupin. So those are like the three kind of levels of songwriting I would put Benny and Bjorn on. When discussing When I Kiss the Teacher, I would agree this is definitely on the Spector end of their songwriting, but also a little bit with Brian Wilson, because Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys had songs about whimsical and innocent times of life. So this is definitely one of those, and it sounds like it would go great in a beach party movie, to be frank. I think it's a great album opener for that reason. It's very light, it's very happy, and it's very innocent. Although I think some people would have some pause with the lyrics given the Me Too movement in today's era, but I think for the time it was perfectly acceptable to write a song like this. And I think just because it's so happy sounding, it's aged well.
It definitely has aged well, and to the effect, I read somewhere that it was like written about mild sexual harassment. Like, get out of here with that nonsense, especially in the time and place where it was written. There's nothing more than a schoolgirl crush here, and maybe just some fantasy inside, in my opinion. But as far as the opener, it's a great opener. It threw me for a tiny loop for the first 30 seconds. With that slower guitar riff, it wasn't what I was expecting. Not a full-blown discography expert on ABBA. I was immediately figuring, here we go, disco land the whole way through. And then 30 seconds in, it takes off and it never looks back. This one gives me vibes from the song Waterloo, minus the horns and put in some disco. It really has that kind of vibe to it, and I dig it. It's a really bright sound that comes early with this opener, and I think it's a great way to open. This is a neat track. This is one I didn't even say this before, but I hadn't listened to this album all the way through before we started doing it this week, and this is one I hadn't heard before that I dug. It was not the same exact sound I was expecting to hear, and that was a good thing.
Yeah, and it also worked really well as the opening number for Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. And that, I think, was proof that the song has stood the test of time, even in a post-Me Too era, because that was post-Me Too, and I don't remember any flack over the song being included in the movie, and there shouldn't have been, because it's just not, in this case, it's not that deep.
There you go.
And also, it was just used in a flashback scene where Donna, played by Lily James in this part,
Yeah.
was graduating from college, and just obviously Donna was starting the Dynamos during this era, and they were just showing how peppy the Dynamos were in their younger years. And performing a song like this and kissing the teacher right when you graduated was pretty funny. So
Yeah.
I really liked the inclusion of it in that movie, and it was one of the songs that really made me want to dig deeper into this album that was included in it.
Yeah, it definitely is a song that would make you want to do that. But Corey, you mentioned disco, and speaking of disco, we're gonna go a little disco with our next track, the one and only Dancing Queen, originally titled Boogaloo. Benny Anderson and Bjorn Ulvaeus were actually inspired by George McRae's Rock Your Baby, which was one of the first big disco hits in 1974. And they decided to kind of do their Europop take on disco for this. So it's not full on American disco, but it has many elements of that. Enough that it's been included on like disco compilation CDs and playlists, even if it's not quite as doesn't have quite as many beats per minute as many other disco tracks. But they really ABBA, they were very meticulous, but this song actually took them 5 months to really get complete and finalized. They worked on other songs in between all of that, of course, but the way we hear it, it took time for them to do that. And they were ready to go early 1976 and to release this as a single, but their manager Stig Anderson said, no, you should release Fernando as a single instead because it's got a broader appeal. But both of them were right, as we'll learn later on when we get to Fernando. But both of them were right, basically. They were both hugely successful tracks, but they actually performed the song on television in Germany and Japan before it was released on an album. They performed it at the Royal Swedish Opera before release, and it got the release in Sweden in August of 1976. The rest is history. This was a big hit, topped the charts in over a dozen countries, including, for the first and only time, topping the charts in the United States for 1 week in April of 1977. So sadly, ABBA's only US chart topper, but it is one that's still very, very beloved today, and for good reason. I mean, it's Dancing Queen.
As I mentioned, this is the first pop song I ever knew. I remember hearing this in like preschool and like internalizing it, and it sounds just new every time I hear it, and that's the biggest compliment I can give to it. I think just the that glissando piano intro into the angelic synthesizers that sound like voices is just one of the best song openings you could possibly have. And then as soon as those voices in that chorus comes in, you're like, "Oh, this this is just a song to make you smile and to brighten your day at any time." And it fills a dance floor every time it comes on. It still does. I mean, my aunt used this as a surprise dance number at my cousin's wedding last year. That's how much lasting appeal this song has. And I think I mean, it's still my favorite ABBA song to this day. I think it's one of the most perfect pop songs ever written. And learning about the recording of this album, finding out that Frida Lingstad like cried upon first hearing the backing track makes sense because that intro is so beautiful. And like again, the angelic synthesizers. And then I also want to bring up the fact that this was one of the earliest music videos ever made and still is an iconic visual for the song as well. So ABBA were pioneers in that right as well.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. This perfection is just where I'm going to start off here, because it's one of those times where the planets align, and as an artist, you realize through tears, through goosebumps, through whatever it may be, that you have made perfection. You have made a hit that will last the test of time. I'm going to hammer that nail of the opening glissando, because for me, straight down the keys gives the immediate vibe for this classic. Like, it is the vibe. I have goosebumps right now thinking of that glissando. It's how perfect it sets the vibe for this track. This composition sits inside of disco perfection too. As far as the beat sets, as far as, even though it was a tad bit slower beats per minute than what we're at this time getting in American disco, it is undeniably finger guns, full on disco moves immediately to the soul, the way this composition is laid down. For me, the real, I'll say, unsung hero in many respects for me here is the drums. Shout out to Ola Brunkert and Roger Palms on this, because these drums are, when I use the word perfection, most of that was to these drums. These drums are laid down. Oh, so beautiful. I've gone back this week. I mean, I love this song and always have, but this week, just going through this song critically, I have fallen in love much more so with these drums. They're so perfect. I'm sorry. I could keep going on those. It's just really front to back perfection as far as composition goes. And that's why, like I said, a timeless classic.
Yeah, I played this on the Touch Tunes jukebox like this past week, and then of course everybody sang along the whole time in my little wearing. It's that song. It always will be a crowd pleaser and the showstopper and any other word. It's Dancing Queen, and the rest is history, as I said before, because it's that song.
I also just want to bring up the vocals, because
Yeah.
part of what makes ABBA so special is that combination of Agneta Faltskog's soprano and Frida Lingstad's alto, and how they blend. And just, this is a song where they sing together pretty much the entire time and harmonize and layer their voices. The blend of their voices on this song is otherworldly, especially in concert with Benny Anderson's heavenly vocal synthesizer that goes along with it. Just bringing those harmonies and that vocal synthesizer together, it sounds like it's coming straight down from clouds parting and sunshine shining right on you. That's all I can describe it as.
When they hang on that minor harmonization, like boom ba da bum ba bum bum bum. Oh, it's so glorious. And later on, when they take that rest right before it, it really is perfection across. I can't stop saying perfection, but it really is.
Yes, but I'm glad, Daniel, that you mentioned the vocals, because while these ladies sounded beautiful together, they could also pack quite a punch just singing by themselves. And the next song is a very nice vocal showcase for our Agneta, the soprano, as we mentioned. My Love, My Life. This was initially a very different song. It was initially titled Monsieur. I'm sorry, I'm butchering the French language here. Monsieur. Oh, good. I'm not going to try. I give up.
Monsieur.
Okay,
Monsieur.
that's better. Thank you for saving my ass there. Okay, so yeah, it was originally to be about like a young summer romance in France, but that's not what we got. This song is actually very heavily inspired by the 1975 hit I'm Not in Love by 10cc, a pretty beloved song of that year. Yeah, I can definitely hear it. This is a very heavily orchestrated piece, and it's a pretty song, but it comes way, way, way too early in the album. I have a big issue with this coming right after Dancing Queen. You got to keep the party going, and this is not keeping the party going. And both Benny and Bjorn have said they felt this song was really overproduced, and Benny actually re-recorded the song in 2017 for an acoustic album called Piano, where he played some of his songs on the piano, and that version was actually the basis for the arrangement that we heard in Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again towards the end of the movie, because it's more of a closer to the end kind of song than on the first side of the album. See, they kind of corrected that mistake a bit. I think that was a good choice, and I do prefer the production on that version a bit better. Not the vocals, but the production. It's still a pretty song. It just really, album flow wise, this drives me nuts.
I'll say this as someone who listened to all the ABBA albums, sequencing is not entirely their strength. Songwriting is their strength, sequencing is not. This is a beautiful song. The vocals are heavenly, as I said before. Agneta really sells the emotion of the song well, but I do agree. I think this would have been better served on side 2 than on side 1. I also want to bring back up Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, because the recontextualization of this song, which in its original form is a breakup song, but in Mamma Mia 2 is more of a closure of grief song. I think that was a beautiful recontextualization of the song, and the way they used it in that movie really moved me emotionally. I'm willing to say that. And it's a shame that the sequencing kind of messes it up on this album, because I really do like this song, but I agree with you. This would have been better served as maybe track 9 or 10.
I'll go right with you guys. Pull the rug out from under the party here. Pull the rug out from under us. Stop it dead in its tracks here as far as pacing. That being said, beautiful song. I'm going to go back to pacing because it's tough for me to find another spot for this, and I want to touch on that a little bit more, but the song itself is beautiful. There's a purity to this song that's really served up nice in this major C key throughout the composition, and her vocals are untouchable. They really are. But back to the rug being pulled out, as far as finding a place for it, the only spot I can really feel that it would be in a perfect placement would be switching this with Dum Dum Diddle and letting this go next before Knowing Me, Knowing You. Because on the other side of the album, if you put it where Tiger is and right before Arrival, it falls flat on its face. And I don't think the other 3 on side 2 should be pulled apart. All maybe too many spoilers there, but I just wanted to touch on that. It's tough. It really is. It's one of the songs here, and again, not being an ABBA aficionado, it's one of the songs here where I say, I don't know if this is for this album. Even though it's a beautiful song, it's just the only real song here, spoiler alert, that really took me out of listening. Even though I enjoyed it and its beauty, it took me out of the whole piece of this one. A weird choice for number 3 as far as pacing goes.
Yeah. I'm thinking maybe end of side 1 could have been a good spot, or maybe after Knowing Me, Knowing You even. But I don't know.
I'm jumping all around, but I really like the way that ends the first side. I don't know if I would give that up.
I mean, I will say thematically, My Love, My Life and Knowing Me, Knowing You go together very well. They're
Yeah.
very similar thematically because they're both songs about the ending of relationships. And we'll talk more about Knowing Me, Knowing You, which I think is the more successful song and obviously the song that stood the test of time more because it was a single. I like the sentiment of the song and I like how it's like it's kind of a polite breakup song. I
Yeah.
like that it's polite and it feels like everybody's like, we've got to move on, but like God bless you. Have a great life. And I like that sentiment. It's very Swedish.
No, I'm with you there. That's why I say flip that and flip My Love, My Life and Dum Dum Diddle. And I think it's way more solid, especially thematically. We get a little happiness, even though inside of a breakup or a politeness, as you put it there. And I like that. And then you get into Knowing Me, Knowing You, where there is, I'm all over spoilers, but we'll get into that when we get down there.
Yeah, we are almost there, but we're not quite. We have to discuss a little ditty called "Dum Dum Diddle." It's spelled like the lollipop "dum dum," but well, Bjorn Ulvaeus said it should have had the silent D at the end. Actually, regarding this song, it's a kind of folk slash disco song about unrequited love for a musician, and Bjorn Ulvaeus has really dragged this song in the years since. And Frida also said it's a silly song. Yeah, I can see why. It's catchy, I'll give it that, but just lyrically, it's just really corny and not what this band does best. I mean, this band has been accused of being corny, but in their best moments, they're not. But this absolutely is. This is often on this show we sometimes have to say gun to the head, this is my least favorite song on the album, but you don't have to put anything to my head for me to say this is the weakest track on the album. Like if you were going to release this is a B-side to a single. This is not an album track, and they had better tracks to have put here. I mean, Bjorn even said he came up with these lyrics at 5 o'clock in the morning and expected them to be rejected, but they weren't. This was actually a promo single in Argentina.
I agree with you. This is the weakness of the album, the weakest track on the album. Even so, there are some really cool production choices on it. I love the way that fiddle-like synthesizer sounds, and I wish it could have been put to use on a better song, but I just really like the sound of it. But if there's any track on this album that should have been replaced with Fernando, it's this one. Like, if you replace this song with Fernando, this album goes up probably significantly and might even be on more greatest album of all time list, in my opinion. I think this is the song that sinks some people's opinions of it. And well, again, I do like how that fiddle synthesizer sounds, and again, Frida and Agneta sound beautiful as always. It's just so silly. And it's kind of hard to take it seriously, especially coming after a song as lush and pretty as My Love, My Life. And if you put Fernando in there in Dum Dum Diddle's place, My Love, My Life, Fernando, and Knowing Me, Knowing You would all flow together way better than putting Dum Dum Diddle in the middle of those, in my opinion.
I can see there. I'm going on the other side of this coin, man. One, I couldn't really relate to everybody, or I say everybody, but a lot of the stuff I read saying like the corniness, I didn't feel like it was over corny. It runs on this folk vibe, and I dig that. And I really feel like inside of this folk vibe, it can be corny, and it doesn't lose me as a listener in the corniness. I'm totally with you on that fiddle synth because it literally mimics the lyrics, or just coincides with the refrain. I dig this song, man. It's a nice little pick me up here. Again, I say flip it. It's produced to like the fullest too. Like the production, you said the production choices you enjoyed them, but I'm with you on that. I think this song, and again, not aficionado, but from what I read, I think it gets terrible heat here for being corny. I think it can be corny inside of the folky vibe. I'm going on the other side. I'm a Dum Dum Diddle fan here.
I think that's
one.
your hot tea take this episode.
It's my hot tea take. Dum Dum Diddle, baby, all the way.
I think what's interesting also is they released a song on their previous album called Bang a Boomerang, and I think it has a very similar vibe to this song. And I prefer the Bang a Boomerang vibe to this vibe, and I think that might also be clouding my judgment because I feel like it's like the second-rate version of Bang a Boomerang.
A song like this probably does sound a bit more comfortable in the context of a song like Mamma Mia as opposed to Knowing Me, Knowing You. Just saying.
Yeah, I got to play devil's advocate too. I feel like if we put Fernando here with My Love, My Life still at 3, I feel like I'm falling asleep a little bit on this 3, 4, 5. I'm not saying they're boring songs. I'm saying as far as pacing goes, coming out of Dancing Queen and never picking back up for the first side, as a first time listener, to flip over that album for me would be like, in the doldrums. So I don't know if I can feel the Fernando here.
What I might actually do is I might actually switch it and put Money, Money, Money on side one and have Fernando as the side two opener.
Heard?
Well,
Heard?
all kinds of ways we can arrange this album, that's for sure. As I said, we are at the end of side one now with Knowing Me, Knowing You, which is a straight up, it's a divorce song, even though nobody in the band had split up quite by this point, but it's a divorce song. It's been noted as like a truly adult song by several critics, including Pete Townshend of The Who, icon and legend that he is. Bjorn Ulvaeus claimed he wrote the song while he was, in his mind, happily married, which is, this is such a stark look at the breakup of a family, but it's done in all the beautiful ABBA flourishes. And I mean, it's just another one of those classic ABBA pop tunes. And I think it was pretty on trend for 1976, 1977. It does fit in the context of its time in regards to what it was. I think this is like the closest you get to the kind of Laurel Canyon sound that was somewhat popular in the late 70s with your Eagles and Fleetwood Macs. I think this is the closest we get to that, but not really. It's a beautiful song, and it was released as a single in February of 1977. It topped the charts in the UK, made it to number 9 in Australia, and it actually ended ABBA's streak of 6 consecutive number 1 hit singles in Australia, and they didn't return to the top of the charts after that, actually. It was just thought to be too much saturation of them after they toured Australia that year. And it made it to number 14 in the US, and yet feels like this, I mean, it should have charted higher quality-wise. It just feels like it did and should have, because it's still a really beloved song. And it's, again, I just think it's one of the most American friendly tunes here, I would say, like just in the context of the music of this era.
I would agree with that, and I think it's one of ABBA's quintessential breakup songs that came before the definitive ABBA breakups, which is pretty funny. And it's one of my favorite songs by them. Again, to bring up the vocals, Frida Lingstad has such a sensitive alto, and her emotion can really be felt on this one. And I go back and forth on whether I prefer Frida or Agneta, and like, I don't know. Like, it's so hard to choose, but this vocal performance sometimes brings me back to Frida every time I hear it.
This is another one of the ones that I wasn't very familiar with coming into this album. I jam on this. The bass has a funky roll to it in the early bass part that I really enjoy. But for me, and we've touched on a lot of this, you guys have touched on it going through this one here is a much much more grittier and powerful composition, especially with the distorted electric guitar in the foreground. You really feel, or I really feel, like the anger and sadness, but also like an empowerment inside of this breakup narrative. And it's backed up by that synth in the verses. I really think this is a powerful, powerful side ender. This is what we talk about all the time when we talk about you got to have one that makes the listener want to flip that record over. And I think this does its job here, and really well done. Charlie, hats off. I clicked on it and started just scanning through it. I think you're dead on with the Laurel Canyon point there. I think it makes sense. I really didn't even equate it to being pleasing to the American listener, but it makes sense. You can see the inspiration, or you could see where the inspiration could be inside of that Laurel Canyon sound. I think that's a great point there.
Yeah, I mean, that was I think of that automatically because this is the year of Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, and at the time, yeah, for what was the highest selling album of all time. So I feel like it kind of casts a wide shadow, and that could happen sometimes.
And I would also say the guitar on this sounds a lot like the Eagles, and Hotel California also came out around this time.
Yeah, yeah. December 1976 was Hotel California, so they were both among the top selling albums of this year, worldwide and especially in the United States. But yeah, now it is time to flip this baby over, and we start with the aforementioned Money, Money, Money. At one point, this song was actually called Gypsy Girl, but that ended up being changed back to its original title, Money, 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 which in the long run is a good thing in terms of political correctness. That's for sure. It's best they didn't stick with that title. This song is very, very Broadway to me. It's very specifically inspired by the musical and film Cabaret, which was a really big hit in the years prior to this. And even the promotional video shot for this song was really Cabaret inspired. There's even a song in that musical called Money. I think ABBA did the concept better, of course, but I feel like early on they just wrote a really good show tune. That's a big part of why it worked so well in Mamma Mia. Like, this was the song most naturally translated to that musical, in my opinion, because it's already there. And this was a single. It was a single in 1976. It was a big hit in Australia and West Germany, topped the charts, came close to it in the UK. But in the US, close to a year later, it only charted at number 56. And quality wise, yeah, I think it should have been in the top 40, of course. But I could see why, because it's just so different. Like with Dancing Queen, Knowing Me, Knowing You, I think they were very actually on trend for the United States market. I don't think that was their whole intention in making music, but this had to be this had to have been pretty out of left field for American listeners circa 1977. But this song has stood the test of time. It's been successfully recontextualized. I think of Mamma Mia when I think of this song. It's just that kind of tune, but it is a really strong song. It is an ABBA classic, and yeah, I think it just does. This is the seedlings of their future Broadway success, I think, is what we hear in Money, Money, Money.
It's also definitely the most lavishly produced number in the original Mamma Mia movie, with Meryl Streep on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And often I just see that visual when I hear this song because it works so well for it. But the original, again, I just want to bring up Frida Lingstad again. The way she can work in different modes, whereas Knowing Me, Knowing You, she's really bringing the heartbreak. In this, she's really bringing the steely resolve and like the motivation. And again, yes, the cabaret, but also I think this is one of their more European sounding songs, and I think that's probably why it wasn't a bigger hit in America. But like the like that synthesizer part is very Andrew Lloyd Webber, actually, I think. I think that that's a big part of why it works as a show tune. And I also wrote down on here for my notes for the episode that ABBA has a few different modes on this album. Obviously, they're pop bangers like Dancing Queen and Knowing Me and Knowing You. They're experimental deep cuts, like I would say something like Dum Dum Diddle is. And they're pastiche novelty songs. I think Money, Money, Money is a nice combo of the pop banger and pastiche. So I just wanted to bring up my little theory on that. So that's what I think of Money, Money, Money.
Well, I guess Charlie's not the only person that steals all of my notes before we get on here. This one is really just well done Broadway musical, hands down for me. The chaotic composition perfectly mimics the lyrics, this rat raceness, this motivation that Daniel was speaking about there. It's here perfectly in the composition. This composition also, like we've said, screams Broadway musical, ultimately leading to Mamma Mia in my opinion, and I think the same opinion you guys have. the listeners can't see, but I erupted in my chair over here with applause as soon as Daniel started talking about Andrew Lloyd Webber, because for me, and in my notes, I have really more of a Jesus Christ Superstar feel here inside of, especially like that arpeggio that you were talking about inside of Money, 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 but it screams Lloyd Webber to me throughout this composition. So it's good to hear that. Like I say all the time, I'm not the only crazy one.
So the ABBA and stage musical story goes back before Mamma Mia, because Benny Andersson and Bjorn Ulvaeus wrote the popular musical Chess, which did produce a big pop hit of the 80s, One Night in Bangkok, a classic, I think. Not as good as ABBA songs, but it's still a pretty cool song, in my opinion. But we are going to move to a more modern sound for the 70s with the next song, track number 7, one of Cory's favorites placements on an album. This is That's Me, which is the first ABBA song to feature a Poly Moog synthesizer, and it's all over this song, and it's glorious. This song tells the story of Carrie, not the kind of girl you'd marry. That's her. I really love this song. It's got a very slight disco feel to it, and I just really dig it. And the lyrics are super clever. Like, this is one of their most entertaining songs just all around. And this was the B-side to Dancing Queen, which is a smart decision. I think these songs go really well together. And it was a single in Japan, and according to the book ABBA Song by Ian Cole, it made the top 10 there, rightfully so. But this might be a hot tea take. I really do think this should have at least been a single in the US. I think this would have been a hit in America. They did pretty quickly move on to the next album after Arrival, which makes sense. And that album had classics on it as well, like Take a Chance on Me. But it's just a shame when you feel like the single lifespan for an album was cut off. I feel like it was a bit here, because this should have been a huge hit.
I agree with you. And, when I was bringing up their different modes, this is like when they mix the pop banger with the experimental deep cut, because you've got that synthesizer that sounds so different than the rest of the album. And I just want to bring up again, Benny Andersson is an awesome keyboard player. He doesn't get enough credit for that aspect of his contributions to ABBA, but like all the key textures he adds on this album, there's so many of them, and they're so unique on each song, and this one as well. Like, almost sounds like a string section. I do like the sentiment of this song. I think it's interesting that we explore different phases of relationships on this album, where you've got like the polite breakup, the divorce, and this is like a woman like questioning herself in the context of her relationship, which is different than many other songs you hear. You don't really hear self-doubt in many songs, and I think they do it very well here. The synthesizers really emphasize the paranoia. The jittery piano really emphasizes the stress, and it's just a really, really well-produced song, and one of my favorite ABBA deep cuts.
Yeah, I didn't touch on Money, Money, Money being a perfect opener for the second side, but I feel like it was. This, we talk about not their strong suit as far as pacing here. I think it's perfectly paced. I love the upbeat tempo jump here. And this composition is spot on. It's spot on. We talked about the keys. We talked about the synthesizer against. I love the word jittery. I like that it aids this ragtime sort of, just that grand piano sound on top of that synthesizer is so wild. Those textures are underrated and unsung. And I didn't even realize that this was a deep cut, but it sings like a single to me, Charlie. And I'm with you with that. I think that this one was perfect for the American listeners because they already had the stylings of this ragtime piano in the subconscious listener of the American radio goer at this point. And I think it would have been a strong outing. It's a really, really well done composition here. There's a tiny bit of repetitiveness in the musicality of it, but that doesn't even faze me here with ABBA because of the size and perfection of their compositions. And I like that too, because sometimes when I get that same sound, it takes me out. But this one, even though there's still some similar musicalities here, it doesn't take me out of it. I jam on this one. Perfect number 7 for this album.
Yeah, most definitely. And this is a bit of an embarrassing confession, but until this week, I actually thought that in the chorus Agnetha was singing, "I'm clearly not the kind of girl you'd marry." I didn't think she said Carrie. A perfect Mondegreen, if you will.
Mondegreen it up. Mondegreen.
Well, to be fair, English was Abba's second language,
Yes.
so sometimes their pronunciations would be funny.
Yes, and sometimes the grammar could be a little bit funny, but that's a big part of what makes ABBA such a unique listening experience, and I'm very grateful for it. Speaking of the ragtime, we get some of that old-timey rock and roll with that piano styling a bit with our next track, which is "Why Did It Have to Be Me?" This has been described as Fats Domino styled, which I could totally hear. It started off as a demo with this name, but then it was reworked into a song called Happy Hawaii. The band finished it. They just thought, this isn't it. So they came up with a more country influenced tune called Memory Lane. Vocals weren't even recorded for it. Besides, nope, that's not right. So they went back to the original title, Why Did It Have to Be Me? Fleshed it out, and it became a really fun duet between Bjorn and the ladies. On the earlier albums, he had far more vocal duties, but going forward, that would not be the case. And that was a smart decision because the ladies of ABBA are beautiful vocalists and such a signature part of the sound that I think Bjorn was smart to realize I don't have their vocal chops, but it does help with certain songs. And I think this is a perfect example of it. We got a really fun old-timey rock and roll kind of song. And this is just an example of how ABBA could take all these different styles. We're hearing so much on just this album alone. Like, we've got disco, we've got folk, we've got Broadway. Like, they do these different genres, but they always put their own unique pop spin on it. And this song is just another example of that. And I thought it was another song that felt tailor-made for a musical, and that's why I'm in a way kind of shocked it wasn't in the first Mamma Mia, but it was of course in the second one, as it should have been. It was one of my favorite numbers, and here we go again.
I agree. I love the duetness of this song. I love that this is one of my favorite Bjorn Ulvaeus vocals on any ABBA song. I mean, Does Your Mother Knows number one? Because of course it is, but like this might be number two. This song is so much fun. I brought up about how ABBA had some pastiches, and this is a perfect rock and roll pastiche. I think it gets the ideals and the rhythms of rock and roll so right while also having the pop sensibilities. And I just really like the rhythm of this song. I think the song like it chugs along and it's sexy. This is a sexy song. And that's really played up in Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. It's the sexiest number in that movie, in my opinion. And like people don't think of ABBA as having sex appeal, but I mean, this is the band that gave us Gimme, Gimme, Gimme a Man After Midnight and Lay All Your Love on Me. So like I think they got plenty of sex appeal, and this is one of their sexiest songs.
I mean, my dad told me he did grow up quite liking the ladies of ABBA. He said those were beautiful ladies. So I think you are correct that ABBA does have sex appeal.
Yep, they do have an undeniable sex appeal. Hot tea take. This is a nice little blues rocker. I could take it or leave it. ABBA stylings are here, and of course, it's produced to perfection. I don't find why or where it fits here, and it was almost a little bit. I hate this. This song, like I said, produced to perfection, nice little blues rocker, but I feel like for me, it was almost on the verge of contrived as far as the American rock sound or the American blues rocker sound on this album. It took me out. If anything, I say put Fernando here. Not in front of Tiger, but I as far as it being in here. I'm hot tea take on this one. And I know you guys are jamming on it. I didn't mean to take any air out of those tires because in no way is it a bad song. But just for me, this is my gun to the head, believe it or not, on this album. In the most positive way, I guess I could say that.
I can see what you're saying a bit. I do feel like this probably might have fit in a bit better on the previous album than this one. This feels like a much more of a throwback kind of sound. Definitely not like as modern sounding as other tracks here, but I still really enjoy it. So I'm not going to complain
I
about
do
it being
too, and I
here.
really do think that Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again's use of it is a part of why I enjoy it. If you haven't seen the Mamma Mia 2 yet, it's really well used in it. It really is.
This is one of the perfect examples of the toughness of taking that I was talking about before, of taking Mamma Mia out of just breaking down an ABBA album, because it's automatic. You know, it's like I automatically go to Mamma Mia or Mamma Mia 2 here throughout this album. So that was tough. That was tough. And Mamma Mia 2, go for it all day.
Yes, but our next track is in neither Mamma Mia movie, actually. It would have been, based on their storylines, a bit out of place considering they're on a remote island, and this song is about the city being a jungle. It's none other than Tiger. It's just a song about how dangerous the big city is. Simon Goddard, in his Pitchfork review, he described this song as, quote, a fabulously unsettling psychopop thriller of urban dystopia and droogish violence not so very far away from Diamond Dogs, unquote. And it's an off-the-wall description, but it kind of makes perfect sense. Just go listen to this song. It's definitely the most straight-up 70s style rock track here, but I really enjoyed this song. There was talk of it being a single, but unfortunately it was not. It was a B-side in a couple of territories, but I'm kind of glad it's not a single. It feels more special to me that not everybody knows it. It's not in a musical movie, so it's kind of my ABBA song a bit, because yeah, I jam on Tiger.
This is the biggest grower on the album for me. Like, this was always one that I kind of glossed over in my mind when I listened to it before, but deeper listening and like thinking about what the lyrics were actually saying, this is a very clever song. And just also the ferocity with which Agneta and Anna-Fried sing this song is awesome. They're basically screaming by the end of it, and it's hilarious. Like, this song makes me giggle a little bit, even if it's a little dark. And I just had so much fun with this one. This is a real grower, and again, an experimental deep cut that works great.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. It conveys so much feeling. The way he put it earlier is almost spot on, as crazy as it sounds, but that psycho thriller aspect of this crazy run through the city, like I can't help but not to think of like dark alleys. And for a bit this week, while I was deep diving and really going through it, as I like to do, try to reach and really just have fun hypothesizing what they could be writing about, I still think that this might be or has a little bit of place inside of drug reference, as far as it trying to get you. And you know, there's all types of different seedy references in here, that add to it, but it's just so super well mimicked by this composition. And like you said, by the end, almost screaming. It's really, really well done. And the crazy part is, as wild and dark as it sounds as we're talking about it, and it sounds in its composition, it still is one where you're dancing along or tapping your feet. Like, it still has that aspect of where you're dancing along with it for me. So I think in the 9 spot, in the penultimate spot of the original cut, I think it's really, really in a great spot, and it really does its job well here.
I mean, I think it could work as a closer too. I honestly sometimes
Agreed.
forget about the closer, actually.
Agreed.
Not to take away from the closer, but it's just such an in-your-face song. I loved it first listen. I've always jammed on Tiger. But now we are at the end of the standard edition, really, as it was in most territories. With the title track, Arrival, it wasn't initially titled that. It was titled Ode to Dalicardia. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It's a reference to a Swedish province. but it was named Arrival after the album had already been titled. And this is a mostly instrumental piece. The vocals are not actual lyrics on this song. Goddard described this as less of a song than a glacier of sound, which is another thing I wouldn't have thought of, but it kind of makes sense too. It's not a song that I go back to a lot. I will say that. When I want ABBA, this is not one of the songs I think I gotta listen to Arrival. But I do think it's a neat listen, and I think it's possibly the most unique song in their discography. You won't hear, I cannot think of another ABBA song quite like this. And I do think it works as an album closer. So in that regard, I appreciate this song, even if it's not one I revisit a lot.
I like this song a lot. And as I mentioned early on, I'm a musician. This is such a cool and unique composition. It really reminds me of Queen more than anything else, actually. If you've heard Queen's version of God Save the Queen, that's what it reminds me of, but like extended out a little bit. I think just the layers of synth with the wordless vocals are so pretty. And it goes with the visual of that album cover. Like it sounds like a helicopter descending and royalty and like royalty or pop royalty just marching towards you. That's what it sounds like. And I just love unique songs like this. And like for a pop group like ABBA, it's so unexpected. And like it sounds like it could be like we were talking about how like Broadway, Mamma Mia, this could be an overture. Like I know it's an album closer, but I think it could be an overture to something. It really just points out how classically gifted Benny Anderson and Bjorn Ulvaeus are.
Tired you steal my notes. No, just kidding. And the first note that I made upon listening to this was fitting end. The second note I made upon listening to this was could have been an overture. Wild to see it at the end of an album. This is so beautifully composed. It doesn't need lyrics to tell its story, as in great instrumental compositions. And even though we both say it could have been an overture, it is such a fitting end to this. It's so weird that it's a fitting end to me. It's mind-boggling that we could go through a whole pop album and end up here. But then when you sit back and take this whole album in, it makes so much sense. It really does. I can imagine this album just spinning, till its end and just relaxing off of this wild ride. And that's what I did many times. This one is a really, really cool one. Unexpected. Again, a lot of this was my first run, and this being one of them, but really beautiful, really a perfect bow for this beautiful present that we got here.
Yes, definitely a fitting end to the album, but there's a couple other songs that we need to discuss because in 1997, this album was reissued on CD with a couple of bonus tracks, and they are notable songs of this era. And it just wouldn't feel right if we didn't discuss those songs. And in fact, well, they've already both been mentioned here because they are a part of this era. And the first of those is the iconic, legendary Fernando. This was actually initially recorded in Swedish by Frida for her solo album, Frida Ensam, which is Frida alone in English. I learned that this week. I was pretty shocked to know that Frida had a solo album during her time in ABBA. I didn't think she was back on that until she worked with Phil Collins for I Know There's Something Going On, a meeting of two pop masterminds, that song is, in my opinion, but I digress. But Bjorn Ulvaeus wrote English lyrics for it because he knew it could be a hit, but he changed the lyrics from just a love story to reminiscing on a fight for freedom. And with the name Fernando, it's kind of implied they're talking about maybe the Mexican Revolution here. It makes sense. This was released as a single in March of 1976. And during their initial lifespan, this was the band's highest selling single. It sold 6 million copies in 1976 worldwide, which that's a crazy number. Not digital downloads. People went to a store and bought the 45. understandably, it's a beautiful, iconic song. It was included on most of these pressings of this greatest hits album that was released during this time, but in Australia and New Zealand, it was not on the greatest hits album, but it was on Arrival in the track 4 spot. It all just makes no sense at the end of the day. This is all really confusing, and it should have been on the album to begin with, but at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter because it was such a success on its own. It topped the charts in 13 countries, topped the Australian charts for 14 weeks, longest running single there at the top until 2017. And it made it to number 13 in the US, but it topped the adult contemporary chart. So it was ABBA's first song to top a Billboard chart, even if it wasn't the Hot 100. And it's Fernando. That's all I'll say about it for now.
This song rules. Like, this song just rules. It's got that beautiful intro again with Benny's keyboards, and then as soon as Frida's lilting alto comes in, you're in for a ride. And I just love how you've got those slow, beautiful verses, and then you've got that folk strumming chorus that feels like a campfire song. And this song feels like, it's one of those songs that it feels like it's been around forever, even though it was written in the 70s. It really feels like a folk standard, in my opinion. And that's why, like, when it was translated to Mamma Mia 2 and Cher sang it, which I'm sure you discussed in detail on the Dancing Queen episode, it worked perfectly because Cher is somebody who can sing the hell out of standards. And in my opinion, Fernando is the closest thing ABBA ever had to a standard.
It's a great point. It's a great point. You're telling me in New Zealand they didn't get Dum Dum Diddle, they got Fernando?
No, this was on the album in addition to Dum Dum Diddle.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But it was on the first side.
Yes.
I didn't realize that when we were talking about that before, but I mean it makes sense. I could go on and on. Yeah, I heard. But Fernando, man, I'm not going to even go to what you guys were saying because we'd be all saying the same thing. I think the beauty of Fernando for me is, and one of the biggest things I take away from it, usually on this podcast, we end up talking about songs that go on for too long, or don't use their time or the space in the time to its fullest. Fernando, for me, is the total opposite, where it feels like I've listened to a 10-minute song and then I look down and it's only a 4-minute and 12-second song. And for me, that's the beauty of it. There's so much music and so much feeling packed inside of the 412. It's mind-blowing how well it's done. It is a classic. I'm with you too, Daniel. It has that old feeling, like it's been around before ABBA wrote it. Like it's a standard of the world, and I dig that about it. Of course, that lends or dives into its folkness, but I really do. It feels like a natural song. It feels like something we've all heard before, even before it was written. So it's such a great piece. Such a great piece. It's wild to me that it wasn't included on all the pressings of this album.
Yes, and another wild thing. I did look up the charts, the Hot 100 for the week that this song peaked, and I was very disappointed to find out that I did know this song only peaked at number 13, but I like to see what was ahead of it, and I am saddened to report that the much maligned Disco Duck outcharted this song that week on the Hot 100. So it just goes to show you some songs stand the test of time and remain popular and others don't. Or you could also take it to mean Americans are stupid, possibly. You might just take it that way, too.
I mean, it's Disco Duck. You can't take that away from Disco Duck. In all honesty, I don't think I'm that surprised. This, for radio at that point, I feel like is... I don't know, man. Fernando's, it's classic. We've said it a million times already here, but I don't know if this is one for the radio. Back then, now I feel like it stands on the radio because everybody's like, Fernando, I love this song. But I don't feel like it hits in a radio in a radio playback then. Maybe that's just me.
I actually, when I hear this song, I always think of That 70s Show because this song was in one of the very early episodes of that. It was called That Disco episode, and Eric and Donna did dance to this. I
Love
know
that.
that show's like controversial in some ways, but it's one of my favorite sitcoms, not gonna lie. So just wanted to
That's
say
cool.
that.
Heard.
And now our other one, the aforementioned Happy Hawaii. This song was the second version of Why Did It Have to Be Me? And you can tell that they're very similar songs. Some time passed, and some people at RCA Australia heard Happy Hawaii and said to Alba, this is a really good song. Like, why is it unreleased? And Benny and Bjorn listened to the song and they thought, you know what? It's not a bad song. We can release it. So it was made the B-side to Knowing Me, Knowing You. And they polished it up a bit, of course, which it Cory's look on his face like, what? That's such a weird combo, which it
Why?
is.
Why put the same song on both sides of the album? I'm sorry.
It's very it's very confusing again. I mean, this song's cute, but it definitely sounds like a commercial for Hawaii. I feel like this should be like one of those tourism ads. You just play this song. I'm glad they went with Why Did It Have to Be Me? Because that has a more universal appeal because not everybody cares about Hawaii. It's very, I don't know. I think there's like a specific audience in mind and you're limiting yourself with Happy Hawaii. I'm glad it's a B-side, but that is also it's a strange single choice pairing. I will say that to put it with Knowing Me, Knowing You.
It reminds me of when some of Michael Jackson's B-sides would be reworkings of other songs because that happened several times. So this, I don't know. I really like Why Did It Have to Be Me? And this feels like they took, I mean, I know this version sort of was like finished first, kind of, but like it feels like Why Did It Have to Be Me, but redone for a Hawaii commercial. And like it feels like it would play in front of an Air Hawaii ad or on an Air Hawaii flight. And like nothing more than that. And I don't know, like the ocean sounds are a bit much. Like the pedal steel guitar is a little throwing it on thick. And and it kind of drives me a little nuts because they're Swedish and I know that they're not from here, but the way they pronounce Hawaii as Hawaii, it's like it's not happy like we're going to happy Hawaii. It's like no, that's not what it is. That's not what it is. So like you're putting it out a song that's like advertising Hawaii, but you can't even pronounce Hawaii. So yeah, this one definitely better left as a B-side slash bonus track in my opinion.
Yeah, this is about as bonus as you get, in my opinion. This is I won't say lucky you made it off the cutting room floor, but like, come on, it is what it is. We've already gone over that. The pronunciation had me too, even though I've been secretly laughing this whole entire podcast because I was worried. I say ABBA all the time, and I think it's like maybe it's the Baltimore accent in me or whatever, and we've all been switching back from ABBA to ABBA to ABBA to ABBA. So I wonder how many people will get us for that one. But yeah, the pronunciation of Hawaii here was tough. It's tough. It's almost a laughable track here, as far as the commercial esque ness of it.
Well, you know what it is maybe they're ABBA are just evil geniuses in this case, and this is a satire of Americans butchering their language. They decide to give it right back to them.
I hope so. I hope so. That would be a cool little tongue in cheek. We were talking about that on White Album, some Lennon-esque, like, you didn't even realize we were making fun of you the whole time. I like that.
That's the beauty of art. We interpret it how we want, and that's how I'm going to choose to interpret this song. And now we are at the end of this journey of ABBA, and now we give our letter grade. Daniel, I'm going to start with you. You are our guest. What is your letter grade for Arrival?
So I'm gonna give this an A minus because, as I've said, sequencing is not their strong suit, but the composition, the level of songcraft, the sounds, just as I said, the combination of the way they have classical chops on top of their layered vocals and their textured keys and their various styles. This album is just a journey in the best way. And even if it has a couple low points, I gotta give it a lot of credit for being as unique as it is in terms of how it's produced. So A minus.
Cory.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I am almost at A minus. I'm at a B plus here. I really enjoy everything on here, and as a musician, there's no way I could. It gets 100 for musicality and production. If I go 10 tracks and 2 are misses, it's sitting there at 80%. That's why it gets a B plus for me. But the originality on this album alone is one of the best reasons I can think of for any new listener to enjoy this album. Anybody out there who hasn't listened to this and enjoyed hearing us talk about it, this is one to go to as a music lover, as a music listener, anybody. This is a really unique run of all different type of styles that just sits perfectly, as ABBA has always done, but especially in this album. So B plus for me.
Yeah, I'm also at an A minus. It's the pacing that hurts it a bit for me. The best albums that we cover that get A's from us are they just have that immaculate pacing and they really knew what they were doing with that. And there's some missteps here. I do kind of just want to, speak to the manager a bit about the sequencing of the album, but they manager might be dead in this case because it was 1976. But yeah, I can't take anything away from ABBA's songcraft and just if I love pop music, and this is some of pop music at its finest. And now this is one of those albums we've had it happen on here before, but one song on this album has a massive life outside of this album, and that is Dancing Queen. We all know it, we all love it, we all know it's brilliant, and nothing can beat it. But because I think it's a bit unfair to the rest of the album, what I think we should do in this case, we've done this before here, is pick our favorite song on the album that is not Dancing Queen. So Daniel, you start with that.
It's got to be Knowing Me, Knowing You. I just think that song really encompasses a lot of what makes ABBA great, mixing the danceable with the melancholy, mixing the 70s rock influence with their pop sensibility, and just being melodically perfect. So it's got to be Knowing Me, Knowing You.
Cory.
Oof, man, that's tough. That's tough. Clearly, Dancing Queen takes the cake on this one. We're going outside of it. Everything really sits almost at that second place vibe for me. Man, it's a fight between 5 and 6. I'm gonna go with you. I'm Knowing Me, Knowing You. Money, Money, Money is almost there for me, but in like my theater kid Andrew Lloyd Webber secret love, it's inching its way. But Knowing Me, Knowing You for me is a real hitter for this album. So I'm with you on that one, Daniel.
I'm gonna go with That's Me. I love a semi-disco banger, but When I Kiss the Teacher's right behind it. Those are both brilliant, brilliant songs, in my opinion. But yeah, this is one there's just a lot to choose from. It's hard to kind of pick a best song when you take out that one. We haven't had to do that for an album in a while, but sometimes you have to. And there we have it. This has been a really fun conversation. I think, Daniel, thank you so much for taking time to join us to discuss this album. We really appreciate it.
Definitely.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great time.
Yes, most definitely. And earlier on, I mentioned a misheard lyric on here, an example of a mondegreen, and that is relevant to where we will be going. Cory, this is all you. This is your specialty.
Mondegreen, people are like, what? But Mondegreen is a 4-day fish festival getting ready to happen. I'm going to be out. One of the reasons why our schedule is so crazy in the summertime. But we're going to take this next month and do some artists that are beloved to us, or beloved across the board for the most part, and run a few albums that have been covered by the band that you guys always hear me talk about, Fish. And maybe do a Fish one in there. We'll see. We'll keep you in suspense there. But the first one we're gonna do, near and dear to my heart, because it was part of the first Halloween festival that my wife ever attended with me. And that was Festival 8, and they ended up covering a beautiful album called Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. So that's what we're going to do next week. Exile on Main Street, little Lovin' Cup, all types of beauty on this album. So I'm excited
Humbling
for that.
Dice.
Oh yeah.
Happy, Shine a Light. Yeah. I am excited, and I think it is a perfect time to do it because next week will be our 100th episode, a huge milestone. So thank you to everybody who's been supporting us that whole time to get us to this point. And I can't think of many better bands to do a 100th episode on than the Rolling Stones. And it's taken us a while to do them, but hard to think of a better time and a better album to dive into. I'm really looking forward to looking into Mick and Keith and the gang. It'll be very fun.
A little bit on how the sausage is made. We didn't even talk about that, and it just happened like that.
Yeah.
And that's awesome, because I mean, I know how much you love the Stones. That's really cool. Universe, good on you, Universe. Thank you for that. That just dropped on. That's cool, man. 100th episode. Get out of here. Here we go.
Yes. Exile on Main Street for that milestone. So yeah, until then, stay tuned, roll your tumbling dices, and also listen to us wherever you feel free. And Daniel, once again, thank you so much. And we will hope you stay happy until we get into the world of exile.